On May 23, 2014, Jim Benning was hired as general manager for the Vancouver Canucks. This is AIDS. The Vancouver Canucks are old and coming off the most successful era of their history, and after the last GM, Mike Gillis, wanted to rebuild, the owner of the team wanted to keep on trying to win hockey games because the owner knows more than general manager, right? Well, a month later, one of the biggest trades in Canucks history finally happened as the first major move by Jim Benning. Ryan Kesler was one of the franchise-defining pieces in Vancouver, winning a Selke Trophy and scoring 40 goals in a President's Trophy winning season, but after a terrible year for the team, Kesler wanted out, and Anaheim was one of the teams he was willing to waive his no-move clause to go to. The Ducks were potentially willing to get rid of Shea Theodore or Sami Vatanen, but Jim Benning liked how Luca Sbisa was NHL ready. They got Nick Bonino, Luca Sbisa, and Anaheim's first-round pick for Ryan Kesler. Sbisa was terrible, and taken by Vegas in the expansion draft a couple years later. Bonino was traded with a second-round pick for Brandon Sutter, who is basically a worse but slightly younger version of Nick Bonino. And at the 2014 draft, Vancouver took Jared McCann over multiple-time goal race winning David Pastrnak the very next pick to Boston, the team that Benning had worked for the 8 years prior to the draft, and certainly knew that Boston was interested in him. But that's not even the worst pick of the draft. Instead, it was the first ever draft selection for Jim Benning for the Canucks, 20 picks before McCann, a local guy with a series of off-ice issues, Jake Virtanen. He's a huge party guy. He loves to get fat in the offseason, and he loves to have off-ice issues. They passed on future NHL All-Stars Nikolai Ehlers and William Nylander. Meanwhile, Jake Virtanen got in trouble with the cops and plays in Germany now. One of the best parts of the draft, though, is 5th round pick Gustav Forsling, who looks like he's going to be one of the best young defensemen for this team going forward, and he was traded to Chicago 6 months later. This trade was pointless. The idea at the time is that Gustav Forsling, their 5th round pick the year before, despite his excellent performance at the World Juniors, wasn't going to hold his value. So let's trade him for a former college rock star. Clendening was not an NHL player. He was 3 years older than Forsling and couldn't make the NHL. Meanwhile, Forsling in 2024 is one of the best players in the world who just won the Stanley Cup as a #1 defenseman. Clendening is a power play specialist in Finland. Jim Benning is on a tear right now because the team is playing pretty well. They went for another addition. A month later, they traded a 2nd round pick for Sven Baertschi. This trade worked out pretty well at first. The unfortunate timing of Baertschi's concussions meant that he never got to play out his career for Vancouver, and obviously you can't retroactively review trades based on who the draft pick turned into, but the 2nd round pick turning into the most valuable asset on a team who at the time is your biggest rival, yeah, that sucks for Vancouver, but it doesn't suck as much as trading your best young player for a negative asset, which is exactly what happened on May 25th, 2016. They traded Jared McCann and a 2nd round pick for Erik Gudbranson. This is the worst trade in hockey, fitting for the holy trinity of bad decisions made within 5 weeks of each other. McCann became a 40-goal scorer. The 2nd round pick was right before another 40-goal scorer, Alex DeBrincat, guy the Canucks had on their radar, and Erik Gudbranson, the defenseman they got back, became one of the worst contracts on the books for Vancouver as a defenseman. Absolutely brutal, but if you ask Canucks fans, it's probably still better than taking Olli Juolevi over Matthew Tkachuk 1 month later. The Austin Matthews draft was loaded. Everyone kind of knew it at the time. The Canucks could have taken the best player on the best team in Canada, but instead took the defenseman from that team. Turns out he's not as good as Matthew Tkachuk, and Matt Tkachuk has gone on to be one of the best players in the world, and if you don't know who he is, we have a video breaking down why he's so good, all the while Juolevi is playing in Finland. It wasn't just Tkachuk though, there was Mikhail Sergachev, Clayton Keller, Charlie McAvoy, Jacob Chychrun, all available at that pick, and if Tkachuk wasn't taken, all of them were realistic additions. Juolevi broke his leg and was on track to be an NHL player, but come on boys, if one bad injury takes you out of the league, were you really on track to be a regular? Be serious. But be even more serious when a week later the Canucks signed the worst contract in hockey, Louis Eriksson, $6 million 6 years. This signing is a catalyst for the worst era of Canucks hockey in the HD television era. Supposed to be a two-way winger to play with the Sedins, when you think about the Canucks finishing 28th in the NHL the season before, it doesn't feel real that they would go sign a big player to a no movement clause at one of the most expensive contracts in free agency. In his first game as a Canuck, he scored an own goal. Great work. This signing signified one of the worst ideas Jim Benning has ever conceived of, to consistently sign expensive, bad players every single time he has the opportunity. 2017, he signed Michael Del Zotto and Anders Nilsson to a combined $5.5 million per season. The next year, 2018, he spent a combined $7.4 million on Antoine Roussel, Tim Schaller, and Jay Beagle, and at this point, the Canucks are spending nearly $20 million per season on guys that you don't even want playing for you. At the time, that was 27% of the salary cap, or the current equivalent of having Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, and $3 million to spend at the Roxy. The next year, in 2019, he added $6 million more to that number with Tyler Myers, and somehow that warranted him getting an extension to stay on as GM. Come on, bro. In the meantime, he actually made some solid draft pickups. Elias Pettersson, Quinn Hughes, the first major steals of his tenure, but his drafting expertise would get pushed a little in 2019 when the draft was actually in Vancouver and the number 1 overall pick was going to be the brother of our most recent draft pickup, Quinn Hughes. Unfortunately for us, they took Vasily Podkolzin over Cole Caulfield, Matt Boldy, and Thomas Harley. This one's a little niche. It's a little new age. Podkolzin right now actually still has a lot of potential, but the idea of the Canucks making a big move on this day with the draft in the home city of Vancouver felt real. They could have gone for one of the super hyped up Americans. They could have traded up. Instead, they got a guy who projects to be a super solid depth forward. He honestly could turn it around still though, so there is hope on his side, unlike the 2020 offseason where Markstrom, Toffoli, Tanev, and Stetcher all walked. This one might be the most painful and the most indicative of absolute failure. Holy, that's kind of mean. But look at this. Assuming every other free agent on the team signed at a normal rate, the Canucks would have had $12 million to sign, let's say, 2 of these players. Is it the starting goalie and the depth defenseman? Is it the top 4 defenseman and the top 6 winger? No, it's every single person leaving the team for free, and everyone walking to a divisional rival too, where they all proceeded to cook the Canucks the next season. Assuming you kept all these guys and traded them for what they were traded for in real life, the package you would have gotten for all of these guys walking is a 2022 first round pick, which became Philip Mazar, a 2024 second round pick, Jacob Batkalia, a 2025 first round pick, Kevin Ball, a prospect, Emil Heineman, a prospect, Yevgeny Volokin, a prospect, Artem Grushnikov, a prospect, Brennan Alley, another prospect, and Tyler Pitlick. Instead, they got Braden Holtby, Travis Hamonic, and traded for Nate Schmidt, who, by the way, they needed to add a pick to get rid of a year later. Insanity. And it actually leads to the next offseason, where the Canucks traded away the 9th overall pick in the 2021 draft, who became Dylan Genther, a 2nd round pick in the 2022 draft, Hunter Haight, and a 7th round pick in the 2023 draft, doesn't matter, and 3 of their brutal free agent signings, Louis Eriksson, Jay Beagle, and Antoine Roussel, for Oliver Ekman-Larsson and Connor Garland. Connor Garland, he's good. He's a name, he's got a face, got an identity, he's a good addition. Oliver Ekman-Larsson was bought out 2 years later and is still costing Vancouver $4 million on the books, just won a cup with Florida, and signed in Toronto. All of the contracts Vancouver traded away were on the last year of their contract anyways. The Canucks missed the playoffs in 2022, so it didn't matter, and Dylan Genther just had 35 points in 45 games for Utah, this season, and hit 50 career points before game number 80. Because the Canucks traded for OEL, they let Jalen Chatfield walk for free, one of the current anchors of the cup contending Carolina Hurricanes. That was enough for Vancouver to fire Benning, who left that fall. If you were to build the current team in a completely unrealistic scenario with the talent that slipped through Vancouver's fingers during the Benning tenure, the roster would look something like Matthew Tkachuk, Elias Pettersson, and David Pastrnak on the first line, Cole Caulfield, William Nylander, and Brock Besser on the second line, Alex DeBrincat, JT Miller, and Tyler Toffoli on the third line, and Dylan Genther, Bo Horvat, and Nils Höglander rounding out the fourth line. On defense, it's still unbelievable with Hughes, Tanev, Forsling Anderson, Theodore Chatfield, and in net you have Demko and Seelovs. Why not? This team would win 75 games, sweep the playoffs, be on the front page of The Athletic as the best team in NHL history, Big Head Hockey would tweet about it daily, and Jim Benning would have a statue in 4 Canadian provinces including BC, Ontario, and Yukon. Instead, he got fired on December 5th, 2021.